just for everyone knowing that this will be recorded as well. So just kind of, if you don't want to be recorded or you want to access it later, totally up to you. So kind of the gist of this is Miriam's going to go through, show a couple slides, talk about sugar, because this is a very hot topic. And then at the end, kind of the last 10, 15 minutes, Miriam and I both will kind of field different questions. So feel free to leave questions in the chat box and we can kind of have a cool Q&A discussion. So I'll hand it over to Miriam.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Yes, Miriam, dietitian, intuitive eating counselor. I wanted this to be about educating you on just the lowdown on sugar and just the psychology of eating. So if everyone, I don't know if Erin, if you can mute everyone just in case we're going to have maybe interruptions otherwise. So I first wanted to say that let's ground ourselves in that sugar is not the devil. And we've had an embedded diet culture in America, and we're very, very obsessed with fad dieting. Has been measured because of the money spent on fad dieting. And if you even look at social media, you'll constantly see fad dieting messaging. What is a fad diet? Basically, if you think of a fad, something that trends just for a little while, sometimes the trends last a year, 2 years, but they shift and morph and evolve. They typically involve cutting out large parts of food groups, extremism, sort of fixation on counting something, or giving some severe rules like timing of eating to, the measuring and counting I mentioned before. So that's basically what fad dieting means. Oh, good, they're drilling next door. Perfect. So there's been a lot of studies on fad diets. So just to give you some examples, Atkins diet, there's paleo diet, there's the extremely low fat diets, there's a really, really high fat diets, low carb, bunch of low carb diets out there, intermittent fasting, so restriction of eating and time intervals. There's Whole30, there's a ton, so I'm not going to list them all. I'm just giving you some examples. What we measure is, are they successful after 5 years? So what does success mean? Like if the goal is to lose weight and keep it off, or keep the same health behaviors, it's not happening after 5 years. There's a drop-off point usually after year 1, typically after 6 months for some. The compliance is so low for some of the really extreme ones. So that's what, professionals like Erin and I, that's what we look at. And then we don't just look at, oh, did you keep the weight off? Or weight on, if that's what the goal was, or body composition. It's how peaceful are you with food? How is your food relationship? Do you feel like you can enjoy food without anxiety? Is your body healthy? How is your blood work, like your cholesterol, your blood sugar, your blood pressure? So the insides, how are the insides doing? So we look at the body as a whole, instead of just the scale weight, to see if it's a successful diet. We haven't really seen any. The only one that's out there that's it's stood the test of time is the Mediterranean diet and the DASH diet. They're really just a focus on whole grains, fruits and vegetables, high fiber, just really nutrient dense foods. or fish, omega-3s. And so those are, if you want to follow anything, those are kind of the two. So I just mentioned all this so you understand where I'm coming from when I'm talking about fad dieting. So when we talk about sugar, and I'm going to give you recommendations because it is important for our body not to be slammed with added sugar, because honestly, our body, it doesn't do well on a lot of added sugar, especially at one time. But I want you to keep this in the background of your mind about that we are human beings. And so there is behavior we have to learn about ourselves. So the psychology of eating dictates if we say we can't have anything, we're going to want it that much more. So you have to watch the ban and the rules that you have. So when we talk about recommendations, we're not talking about banning. It's just maybe like something to shoot for. Some days you get it, some days you don't. But it's just a recommendation based on a lot of health studies. So it's not gospel. We also wanted to go into sugar cravings and addiction at the end, if that's an actual real thing. A lot of buzz on that. And really watching the thoughts around certain foods, like, so sugar, like, do you have an all or nothing thinking? Sugar is bad, sugar is devil, watch the thinking errors, because honestly, it's not just with food. If it's actually called a cognitive error when we have absolute statements with anything. It's really harmful what we tell ourselves. What we tell ourselves changes and shapes us. So we want to be very factual and moderate when we talk about food. It matters. So when we say, oh, that has sugar in it, you can say that's a very neutral statement. But if you say something like, that's going to kill you, that's not actually true. Now, if you ate buckets of it daily, I mean, it'll take a while, but maybe you'll die from it. But it's still not causative. So I just want us to really watch our thoughts. Okay. So in saying all that, I laid the foundation so we can have some healthy thinking and a very rational mindset. When we have added sugar, when I say added sugar, I mean sugar that has been added after the product is finished. So it's not something that's naturally occurring in the actual structure of the food. Like it wasn't born with it. In other words, like fruit was born with sugar in it. Dairy, born with sugar in it. So fructose is what's in fruit and lactose is what's in dairy. Those are naturally occurring sugars. And I don't want you to worry about naturally occurring sugars. Where we can fall into an unhealthy pattern is when we are slamming our taste buds with a ton of added sugar. We no longer taste it anymore. And then our body has to process it. Whatever we give it, it has to process. And if it's in excess, it can lead to some harmful things. But again, it's over time. So the link to certain disease processes when you do slam your body with a ton of added sugar, there's been, you don't get diabetes from eating too much sugar. It's also being sedentary. It's also eating in excess, being obese. Heart disease, diabetes, so that's mentioned. And the issue with just adding a bunch of added sugar is that it doesn't provide you with nutrition. It's not, when I say nutrition, I mean nutrients that are going to work for your body. So like vitamins and minerals and antioxidants and fiber, things that are going to be health promoting. It's just they're just calories. They're just energy. That's all that it's providing. So it's good to think about getting enough bang for your buck when you're talking about each food you're eating. So on an ingredient label, sugar may appear under so many names, more than 50. Okay. So I threw this in a compromise because now that I stated some recommendations and just a little bit of, maybe a limitation on added sugar. We can't eat and I love this statement from Isabel Foxen Duke. She's a pretty awesome blogger if you ever want to look her up. We are never going to eat according to our body's needs exclusively 100% of the time. So a more realistic goal is some flexible and unprescribed negotiation between the needs of both. So I want you to think about that. Honoring the needs of your body and your mind in your food choices. If you're like, for instance, at lunch, you're like, I'm going to have this really nutrient dense sandwich with whole grain bread and maybe it's a bean burger and avocado and sprouts and all these really nutrient dense things. And then you're like, and for my play food or for my mind, I want something sweet and maybe not functional for my body. And that's okay. And we need to have both. So I just want to put that out there. So these are some more guidelines. See how I'm like going back and forth? I'm messing with your brains. So to get more specific, if you really wanted to do a quick measurement or count, just get a tally or a quick data point for yourself. I think it's important to have awareness of what we're inputting in our body. But then of course, remember that the healthy self-talk and the mindset. So no more than 10% of your daily calorie needs. Hopefully that we don't go over that with added sugar, because then what ends up happening, you're displacing nutrients we really need for our body to heal and protect us from certain viruses going around. I don't know if you've heard of any. So we can feel good and energized and do the things we want to do every day and prevent a bunch of really scary diseases. So that's something to think about, not about just what we look like and what we weigh, right? So for instance, being on a 2,000 calorie diet, basically you want to stay under about 50 grams of added sugar a day, or that comes out to be 12 teaspoons if you're counting that way. Now for children, if you have children, the recommendation is much less. So remember, they have little bodies and they actually need even more nutrient dense foods because they're growing at such a rapid rate that we need to not displace most of their foods with just simple calories or just added sugar. So, and then there's this little cute picture on the right if you wanted to compare and contrast the added sugar grams. Everyone learns differently, so sometimes the pictures help. Okay, so I mentioned that there's over 50 types of added sugars out there, and you may or may not recognize that a product has added sugar in it. So I just wanted to give you a heads up of where added sugar could be. And remember, anything that is in a food product has to be listed in the ingredients. That's by law. So always look at the ingredients first and see if you can recognize any added sugars. Then you can go to the label and check if there's added sugar grams. Not every product will show added sugar grams. Sometimes you have to do a little digging. So clearly beverages, cereal, candy, chocolates, yogurt, you got to look at your yogurt. Now, if there's like 6 to 7 grams of sugar in your yogurt, that typically is naturally occurring. You want to see in the ingredients if there's any added, like cane sugar. other sugars can show up in some surprising places that we may or may not even think about, like whole grain cereals and granola, oatmeal, frozen foods, protein bars, pasta sauce, a lot of condiments. They'll throw in some sugar. Things that are already sweet, which really kills me, like applesauce, fruit juices, dried fruit. So we have to think about when we get used to a high level of something, our body will adapt to that level, and then its sensitivity will come down. So I'm talking about taste buds. So if we have too like excess sugar, for instance, our taste buds actually change their shape, so they aren't as sensitive to it. Now, if you lower the sugar, added sugar, your taste buds alter its shape so it can taste it more. So it's super cool. It takes at least a couple weeks, 3 weeks sometimes, for your taste buds to start shifting. Then it's more of the habituation and the just conditioning. But physically, we can start tasting differently fairly quickly. And this is the same thing with salt and fat. Okay, so now talking about natural sugar alternatives. I like these a lot because you aren't just getting empty calories, you're getting some really nice, you're getting some nutrients with it. When I say nutrients, I mean, vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin K, all those vitamins are used for your body to heal and recover and fight disease, etc. We want that. We want our food to fight for us and to make us feel good. So I will use dates and figs in smoothies to sweeten it up, or in baking, I'll just puree it. Blackstrap molasses will have some antioxidants, but remember, we don't want to go like super nuts, like, ooh, has some nutrients in it. It's still negligible compared to like eating the whole fruit or having a vegetable. So, and plus you don't want to be slamming your taste buds with excess sugar. So these are some of the natural sweetened sources. Okay. I mentioned looking at the ingredient label first. Check it out. And obviously, I'm sure all of you know, the ingredients are listed in descending order of abundance. So it's going to have the most of, like, say, the first few ingredients, and then it sort of tapers off from there. So you can play around with using fruits and vegetables for baking, sweet potatoes, apples, dates. It's really kind of fun, actually. And then you'll notice just a richer, more hearty meal. More tips. So for beverages, some people really struggle here. If you always need something sweet in your beverages, try getting creative there too. Like, there's lots of herbs that you can use. I love mint so much. I stick it in everything. And then, you can always add fruit. I don't want you to have a sugar-free diet. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that we want to be moderate, right? And give our body what it needs, but also remember, have that a little play food too. Sugar sweetened beverages. The problem here too, when you drink your added sugar, is you're actually not going to feel very full from it. We end up, we're not getting satiated from it. And so we end up also, eating sometimes more, and we're not getting really hydrated when we have a lot of sugar in our beverages. So it's really not the best scenario to have a lot of sugar in your beverages. So baking is really fun for me and my son. And we've been playing around a lot with some sugar substitutes that I've been really enjoying, and that are safe, and the body doesn't reject it. So monk fruit, this one in particular, has erythritol in it. Erythritol is a sugar alcohol. Anything with OL means alcohol. It's not like you're actually drinking alcohol, it kind of burns out. But it's so safe. It doesn't give you digestive issues like the other sugar alcohols do, like maltol, xylitol, sorbitol. Erythritol, it has a different route of absorption. It's very glycemic and just really safe. So that combined with a monk fruit, it has a nice, really nice taste. And so I'll bake with that sometimes. And then stevia. Stevia is a plant. And I know it has a bitter aftertaste, but I've been putting some peppermint stevia in my smoothies sometimes, and for baking, and super good. So you can play around with that too. Sugar addiction. So when people claim sugar lights up the same regions of the brain as, say, cocaine or other drugs, that's not actually true. So in the studies done on rats, that only actually happens under forced deprivation, which means dieting. So under deprivation and restriction, a person's reward response is really heightened. So there's an enhanced reward response under conditions of restriction. So it's because of the behavior of restricting that it will cause us to want more and be more preoccupied and more fixated, mimicking addiction. So it's actually not the same thing as a chemical addiction. So I really wanted to share that it's just not, it's not the same. And behaviorally, you can be causing something that does mimic an addiction. So that's why it's so important to have that permission and unconditional reasoning to have the sugary food, because if you don't, then you might start up this like addictive thinking. So I know that's hard for people to understand. So the bottom line, this is just the summary. Sugar is not, it's not a health promoting compound. It's just not, that's the fact. Eating a lot of sugar doesn't make our bodies better, stronger, healthier, or more functional. It doesn't contain any vitamins and minerals and phytonutrients and fiber, and it can be easy to overconsume, especially when it comes in beverage form. But it's also not the devil, as described in the beginning of this presentation. We are allowed discretionary calories. We're allowed to have that play food, and for our soul, just like soul food, you know? So just be aware and educated and strategic. And that, remember that negotiation of what our body really needs and what our mind wants. We have to be somewhere in the middle, or else we're gonna run into problems. So I will conclude there. So I'll just open up the floor now if there's any questions. We have, 5 minutes. Not a lot of time left.
Great job, Miriam.
Thank you.
Erin here again.
Yes.
Yeah, so if anyone has any questions for the last kind of 5 minutes, please feel free to leave them in the chat box. And then this is also something that Miriam and I are going to be doing monthly. So next month, I'll be talking about calorie counting, because that's always a fun one, and calories. But this was such a great presentation, Miriam. I feel like sugar is such a hot topic. There's so many myths out there. There's so much confusion. And I think you did such a great job of kind of showing how, you know, it's like with all food, it's more than just food, right? And why we eat. So a question is, I'm getting a couple questions here. Miriam, can you mind going to the final slide? Because a lot of people are interested to hear that. Yay.
The thank you slide?
Yep. And if there's any,
what happened?
I think you went too far.
Oopsie. Oh, there you go.
There you go. Perfect. And then, so some questions are, oh my goodness, they're coming so fast.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Okay, so there's a question about what do you think is better, brown sugar, white, or any other sugar? I think you kind of explained that, where sugar is sugar. And especially when it comes to all of those processed refined sugars, they're all going to be really similar. And I think that's where you have to look at, kind of like Miriam said, your overall intake, right, of what you're consuming. Are those natural? Are those refined? How much? And then, like she mentioned, some of those things like honey or molasses are going to have some nutrition in terms of some vitamins, some minerals, but they're still going to be digested and absorbed very rapidly, like sugar. Okay, and then there's a question, Miriam, if you want to take this one, about agave has some drawbacks. Kind of maybe talking about agave as one.
Yeah, I mean, you know, because I think you're probably talking about because of the fructose, and it's so concentrated. But what's cool about agave, when you use just a little, like a little goes a long way, and it does have some nutrients in it, negligible, like little bit, but and it's not, there's nothing really added to it, so that I would deem a natural added sugar. So that would trump, you know, your table sugar, brown sugar, white sugar. So a little bit, that is fine.
So one other question here is, does it matter when in the day you consume sugar? I don't know if you want to take that one as well.
No.
You want me to take that one?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, you can take it. Yeah.
Okay. So, you know, I think again, I think have a tendency, our society, to focus on a specific nutrient or food. And so really the thing to keep in mind is overall, what are you consuming throughout the day? What are your eating patterns? And, you know, what does that look like? So again, if you're eating mostly whole kinds of foods and then you're incorporating those play foods at times, you know, that's very different than relying on processed and refined foods for the majority of your intake. So, you know, then there's also timing as well. But the reality is your body does rely on sugars, you know, on carbohydrates as its primary energy source. So I think the kind of the thing to look at more in depth is, you know, what are your overall eating patterns? Where are you getting more of your refined sugars? Are there places to incorporate more of those whole types of foods? And then for a lot of people, right, we tend to consume our refined sugars in the evening because we're hungry or we're bored or we're, you know, eating all of those snack foods. And so that, I think, is looking at the bigger picture of why are you eating at that time and kind of looking at evaluating, changing that behavior, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, that's really good. I see a couple of questions that are really similar about sugar feeding cancer, or there's another one on the claims of sugar, and then expediting aging. Yeah, there's some really, again, they're like in animal studies, that if we eat more calories or more sugar, it does feed cancer. That's a heavy topic. I want you to keep in mind what we talked about what I talked about at the beginning of, you cannot fight your psychology. You cannot fight it. So sure, if we were robots, we can probably fight cancer really quickly, but we have behaviors, and cognition. So you cannot ban anything. That's the thing. It will not work, but you will fight against it tooth and nail. So even if that were true, it doesn't matter. You need to have a little bit so that you don't feel deprived. You just have to be at that negotiation with being functional for your body, and then having that play food for your mind. So staying somewhere in between.
Love it. And it's 1 o'clock, so I know a lot of us have other meetings and whatnot, but thank you everyone that tuned in for your comments. Miriam and I love this kind of stuff, so we're happy to see so many other people, and yeah, join us next month as well for another topic. So,
yeah, thank you everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Erin. Thank you, Mona.
Thank you. This talk will be recorded and put on YouTube. And so once we have the link, perhaps Erin, we can share it with everyone that attended. I don't know if you'll have the attendee list from Zoom on here, so we can share it
Sure. I have a list, and I think Erin has some.
Yeah.
too.
Sounds good.
You can figure it
Yeah,
out.
thank you.